delighted here to be with Dr. Chris Kayes. He has a PhD from Case Western Reserve University. He is also a professor of management and the chair of the Department of Management at the School of Business. He's also a senior fellow at the Center for Excellence in Public Leadership at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is author and co-author of 5 current and forthcoming books, including Destructive Goal Pursuit, The Mount Everest Disaster, The Learning Advantage, Six Practices of Learning Directed Leaders, Contemporary Organizational Behavior in Action, and Continuity, The Breakdown and Rebuilding of Learning in Organizations. You've been busy. And what I like to do is get directly to a key question here. How do you define leadership?
Well, leadership. Well, one of the challenges with leadership is there's about 1,000 different definitions of leadership out there. So one of the things that we try to do is figure out what's the definition that's going to be most helpful for you as a leader in your organization. And through the leadership classes that we offer here at GW, we help students figure out what kind of leader they want to be. We typically think of leaders as people that influence others, that have some kind of a following, but there's also other kinds of leaders, right? We see leaders in all different walks of life doing all different kinds of things. So one of the things we hope students do in this program is get a better sense of how they see themselves as a leader and how they can develop their own leadership capacity and capabilities.
So we have students coming into the MBA program with a healthcare focus, right? And part of their learning objectives, part of what they want to come out of it is learning a set of skill sets, knowledge. And we've been talking a lot about knowledge and gaining information. But there's also equally important, this whole component is, what do you do with all this knowledge and information? Eventually when you graduate, you're going to be asking for a promotion or get to a position where you're in a leadership position. Talk to me a little bit about your experiences with students going through the MBA program and their new roles as they graduate.
Sure. Well, I think one of the exciting things about working in our MBA program is that we've got a lot of students who have been very successful in their careers, and most of their success has been based on their technical ability, whether they're MDs or nurses or nurse practitioners, or on the business side, maybe they're great accountants or finance folks. But their careers are really taken a stall, and they're not able to get to that next level. And the technical skills are only going to get you so far in an organization, and that's where the leadership piece really comes into play. Accounting, finance, economics, these are all really important to understand, but the leadership is about how do you communicate those ideas to large numbers of people? How do you work across different departments that have very different goals, very different sets of assumptions about the way the world works? And that's where the leadership piece comes in. I was just talking to one of our major employers a couple weeks ago, and I asked him how our students are doing in terms of the interview process. And what he told me is, he said, our students are great at math. They can do the math component of problem solving very well. They understand the sort of nuts and bolts of organizations. But what they're really looking for, and I think our students really excel in this area, is how do they solve problems in a creative way? How do they build innovation? How do they influence others? How do they lead change? And these are the things in terms of the leadership curriculum that you really learn. It's taking these different disciplines, these different sort of specialty areas, and looking at the organization more broadly so you can communicate, you can influence, you can lead.
And I know the students will eventually take your course, right, the leadership course here. Tell us a little bit about your course and how do you teach leadership? What should they be expecting?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of great faculty that teach leadership. I'm one of those. So as the team of us that teach leadership, we really take a self-directed learning approach to leadership and help students find out what are the skills that they think they need and what are the areas of leadership that they want to focus on. So every professor has a little bit different specialty, a little bit different nuance in terms of how they teach it. But overall, they're really helping students develop those specific skills they need. And I think that's one of the unique things about the GW leadership courses that you can take, is that you're gonna really do a lot of self-discovery exercises. You're gonna do a lot of self-assessments. You're gonna talk to a lot of people both in your work, maybe your family, maybe your spouse, which oftentimes are your significant other, which can be dangerous. But you're gonna get a lot of feedback in the leadership process, trying to understand your own leadership and how you can develop as a leader. So it's not just dry concepts. It's not just understanding the 5 points to effective negotiation or the 4 points of influencing. It's how do I use those in my daily life, or how do I use those at my workplace?
A lot of hospitals now are implementing what we call electronic medical records or electronic health records as part of a broader system. And sometimes we see the horror stories that are coming out with implementation. And a lot of it is directed towards the implementation part, where teams came in to start to apply electronic medical records. You've written a book, right, talking about, it's basically the Mount Everest disaster, right? Is implementation of EMR similar to a Mount Everest disaster? How can we create some similes here on this?
Sure. Well, that is a great metaphor or simile, whatever those things are. And in fact, my new book, which is called Organizational Resilience, really tries to get the human element of how to implement these kinds of technologies. So a lot of times in organizations, we think of failure, we think of breakdowns as being technology-oriented in nature. But really, it's the human factor that we've sort of forgotten. In fact, I was talking to a large consulting firm, and they were doing a large implementation of an IT system in a hospital. And it was such a small fraction of their budget that was devoted to the human element, to the training. And that's what we're trying to get people to do, is to recognize that it's not the technology side where the vulnerabilities are. It's on the management side. It's on the human side. And so how do we build processes that can help us be more resilient in our organization? It really comes down to those leadership, management, team building, helping people understand the intricacies of the technology. How do you deal with different pieces of information? How do you communicate that across different aspects of the hospital or the healthcare organization?
So you raise an issue of team dynamics, right? And I'm going to tie it to the experience of the MBA students in our coursework here, because a lot of the projects that they will engage in is in teams, right? And some of your experiences working with students in different teams, what are the things that you see happening over and over, things that they should be aware of? This is kind of more of a knowledge, exchange, like let's give you some knowledge up front.
Right. Well, we actually happen to have a number of team experts in the Department of Management. So if you look for courses that have either the MGT designation or the MBAD designation, you're going to find people that are experts in teamwork. And what they tell me, and what some of our own research has told us in looking at teams, is communication is very important up front. And if you do the right things up front as your team, if you establish some ground rules, establish how you're going to communicate, establish when things are due early on in the semester, that you're going to be much better off in week 7 or week 14. So really communicating up front allows you a little bit more flexibility later in the semester. If there are mistakes, if there are sort of hurdles that you have to jump, setting an environment of psychological safety where people feel like they can bring up tough issues, communicating those other tough issues, being able to hold people accountable, knowing when to divide the task up and when to expect somebody to return different pieces of the puzzle. Knowing that early on sets the stage for effective teamwork throughout the semester. And that's something we've actually studied, and we know pretty clearly that setting those good team processes early on helps you later on. And so we actually have a lot of tools that we've developed. I know you use some of them in your class. Other professors use other tools, and these tools really help to design. They're designed to help these teams be effective. And we're working on now Sharon Hill, one of our faculty members, who's an expert in geographically dispersed teams, is also developing some tools that can help teams. So if it's a problem that a team's looking for, let us know, and we'd be happy to get you some of those tools. We work with teams all the time. I always say that about 5 to 10% of the teams are going to be dysfunctional by the end of the semester. So it's something we expect. It's just a natural part of teamwork, right? Because working together, it's people working together, and people always have conflicts, and it always happens. But it's the teams that can get over that conflict. It's the teams that can deal with those problems. Those are the ones that are successful. And that's what we try to do in most of our courses, is set those processes so that when you do have the conflict, when you do have the problems, you can be successful even with those breakdowns.
And in one of your earlier answers, you threw in the word management or manager. Let's be more specific. Let me ask you, what is your definition? What is your own personal distinction between a leader and a manager?
Well, this is a very controversial topic. We typically think of leaders as people that sort of set vision, that have an idea of what the future should look like, and help people get to that vision. Managers are people that deal with the day-to-day, the nitty-gritty. They set the rules, they set the agenda to try to reach that vision. In my view, it's actually management that we've fallen down on. We have a lot of great leaders out there. We do a lot of great leadership training, but we need people that can understand how a vision can be implemented and to make decisions about whether that vision is realistic. You referenced one of the areas of research that I did where I looked at a group of mountain climbers in the 1996 Mount Everest climbing disaster. And many people know that because John Krakauer's book, Into Thin Air, was written about those events. And there was actually a recent movie called Everest that came out. And one of the things we saw there was really ineffective management, really ineffective leadership as well. But the management in the sense that the leaders in that group didn't know how to organize very well. And leadership in terms of not being able to deal with conflict that arose in the group. Not having people second in command that could take charge when the leaders became disaggregated from the group. So it's really, to answer your question, you need both leadership and management skills to be successful in today's environment, particularly in healthcare with the complexity, with the challenges that are faced in healthcare.
So here's my tricky part of the question here. How do you see entrepreneurs fit in?
Well, every organization needs entrepreneurs, I think. And in organizations that most people are working in are going to be they're going to have hierarchy. They're going to have top-down administration because it's the nature of healthcare was structured in a very hierarchical top-down organization. But we still need people to be innovative. We still need people to take the lead. So building that entrepreneurial mindset is even more important today in healthcare than it's ever been. And I think there's a lot of different ways that people can express that entrepreneurial spirit, whether it's coming up with new ideas, implementing new ideas in their own organization, or in the more extreme cases, I guess, starting their own company, finding new ways to work from the system outside the system. So entrepreneurship is just really important. It's that mindset about innovation and looking at things differently. And that's really, very closely tied to change.
What are you working on now? What's the entrepreneurial activities that you're working on right now?
Well, that's a great question. I'm actually working with some really interesting groups. I'm actually working with some athletic teams and some teams that are trying to improve their performance by becoming better teams. So it's an interesting area for me to work in because I've usually worked with teams that are in organizations and office settings, and this is a more athletic kind of an environment, so that's exciting. And of course, always looking at new books. Right now, looking at the learning process. And how do we improve the learning process, particularly for people in organizations? So how do we renew and spark that natural desire that people have to learn in their organization and bring back some of the joy of learning that people experienced when they were kids? And how do we infuse that into the organization? How do we build that kind of organization?
What about online learning? You opened it up now. You said learning. Now let's talk about online learning. What do you think of that?
Well, I've been teaching an online course for a couple years now, and I appreciate the plug for my course, Executive and Leadership Development, and it's been really exciting to work with students from around the world to help them build their leadership capacity, to help them think more strategically, to help them understand what their own limitations and possibilities are as a leader. And a lot of the course is really focused on understanding your own capacity as a leader, understanding what tools are out there to build your leadership capacity and how to lead others. And that's why it's based on my book, which is called Learning Directed Leadership, which is leaders who use the learning process to engage others, develop themselves, and also develop others.
Last question. How long have you been with GW, and can you tell us about your experience with GW so far?
Sure. Well, I've been at George Washington University for 15 years, and it's an amazing place. There's no other university that you can look out your window and see the White House and see the Washington Monument, and be 4 blocks from the State Department, 3 blocks from the World Health Organization. So it's the location is really important. And I think in our online community, what we're really trying to do is take this location out to the student who maybe isn't going to get a chance to visit the campus. If you do, I encourage you to. We do have a lot of great one-week sessions here. We have a lot of one-week courses where you get to visit Washington, D.C. and take advantage of all the things we have to offer. But we're also trying to take the GW experience out to students. And I think, with some of the programs that you've been doing with students, I think it's a great way to engage in Washington, D.C., but also stay where you are, and work hard from your own home.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. And I think a lot of my students will be taking your course soon. So thank you for coming.
Great. Thank you.
Dr. Chris Kayes. The focus now is on leadership. what does leadership really mean? What does it mean to you? Do you see yourself as a leader? Do you see yourself as a manager? Or you don't really care if you're a leader or a manager? But at some point in your work, in society, in everything you do, you have to take some leadership positions. You have to manage some difficult tasks. Understanding the art and science of leadership and management is key to success. But do not forget that with entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship, it allows you to be creative. So this is your time to enjoy the experiences of managing, leading teams, being an entrepreneur or entrepreneuring things, and learning what happens, what worked, what didn't work, to make yourself a better person.